representative from SV at Home is in the attendees list, they could raise their hand and I'll promote them to speak in just a second. But let me know when you guys can see this as a full screen and we will get started. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our Affordable Housing and Building Safety Month event. This evening, we've got a presentation from Silicon Valley Independent Living Center and Project Sentinel to provide a rental assistance webinar for the community and for our community and for the community at large who may be attending. So my name is Robert Muslam. I am the Housing Authority Administrator for the City of Milpitas. And with us today, we have Mark Thomasy and Allison McDonald from Project Sentinel and Angelica Holguin from Silicon Valley Independent Living Center. And we are supposed to have a representative from SV at Home. I'll just pause here for just a second to see if that representative has joined us, and if they have, they can raise their hand. But I don't see anybody. But just a quick mention, so we are doing this webinar in partnership with SV at Home, who is celebrating Affordable Housing Month. There is a bit.ly link here at bit.ly/SV Housing Month 2021, where you can go and see all of the events that have taken place over the month of May. And they're all recorded so that you can download them or digest them as you please. So we'd just like to thank SV at Home for sponsoring this event and for allowing us to participate in Affordable Housing Month. So with that, I will turn it over to the Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, and Angelica, it is all yours.
Thank you. So I'm Angelica Holguin. I am the Director of Programs at Silicon Valley Independent Living Center. I'm going to present on our Milpitas Rent Relief Program. Unfortunately, Veronica Martinez was unable to join us, so we will just go ahead and move on. Next slide, please. So the city has partnered with Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, a nonprofit, to facilitate rent relief services to Milpitas community members in need. This includes the application process, eligibility screening, case review, and service coordination determination, as well as payment. Next slide, please. The types of assistance that we are able to assist with is rent deposit relief, emergency hardship relief, eviction prevention. We're able to work with domestic violence relocation for some of the referrals that we receive, child and family homelessness relief, as well as Section 8 good faith deposits. Next slide, please. So the eligible recipients include the following. We can serve students that are attending Milpitas Unified who are experiencing homelessness. We have a very good partnership with actually Milpitas Unified, and we receive many referrals from them. So we also assist seniors who are age 55 and older, disabled individuals, victims of domestic violence, emancipated foster youth, and unaccompanied minors, as well as individuals living in subsidized housing, including Section 8, and other emergency housing needs on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So SVILC has been able to assist 76 households and 376 Milpitas residents since the program has begun. We're able to provide rent relief at $5,000 per household per year. Next slide, please. So we wanted to share with you a success story. We had a consumer, MG. She was a young college student who had been homeless since July of 2020. He was living in a van and taking showers when the gyms were open. He would ask friends to use their showers. After COVID closed everything, he reached out to the city of Milpitas for assistance. The city made a referral to SVILC, And we were able to contact MG to further assess his needs. He was looking for a room to rent somewhere in Milpitas, since his part-time job is at Milpitas. We were able to assist him with tools and resources to assist him in finding a room for rent. After a few weeks, MG called and let us know that he had successfully secured a room, and if we could assist him with the first month's rent and deposit, he would be able to move and be able to secure the payment through the Milpitas Rent Relief Program. MG was thrilled that he found a room, that he was safe. He was finally able to lie down in a nice warm bed and study for his finals. He shared that he is beyond grateful that the city of Milpitas has a program to help residents who need housing assistance. Next slide, please. So our referral process, individuals can reach out to SVILC directly, or we receive community referrals. They can be referred to a program by either a case manager, city staff. We have partnering social services agency, as well as Milpitas Unified School District. Below is our contact information. You can contact us at 408-894-9041 or housing911@svilc.org. We also have staff that speak Spanish. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to, I believe it's Project Sentinel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angelica. And yeah, just to reiterate, we really appreciate the partnership with the Silicon Valley Independent Living Center. We've been working on this program for over a year and a half now, coming up on a 2-year mark. And it's been very, very successful, and we're very appreciative of all of the work that that the Independent Living Center has done for our residents. And I know, Angelica, you filled in very well for Gabby, so just really appreciate you doing that on such short notice. But yeah, if you reach out to the Living Center, you will be in touch with somebody who can help you with your case. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to it's housing911@svilc.org. Or if you get in touch with anybody at the city here in the housing department, we'll be happy to refer you as well. So again, thank you for that part of the presentation. And like she said, I'll turn it over to Project Sentinel.
Next slide, please. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Thomasy. I'm the landlord tenant counselor with Project Sentinel for the city of Milpitas. I also cover the city of Fremont. So I guess one of the main points we want everyone to understand about the situation right now under COVID-19 is that if a renter has been financially impacted, what they call financial distress related to COVID-19, and they're unable to pay the rent for that reason, that they are protected from eviction. And so there's actually two, under the state law, the latest version of it, SB 91, there's actually two periods of protection. There's March 4th of 2020 through August 31st of 2020. A tenant, if they submit a declaration of financial distress to their landlord for unpaid rent during that period, they could never be evicted for non-payment of rent during that period of time. They still owe the rent, as we'll discuss a little bit later, but it becomes consumer debt. It's not debt that a landlord could file an eviction based on. The second period of time that's protected is September 1st of 2020 through June 30th of this year, next month. It's a little bit different. Tenants still have to pay that, still have to submit the declaration of financial distress to their landlord to be protected from eviction, but they also need to pay at least 25% of the unpaid rent for that period of time, September through June. But by the end of June, the end of next month, they have to pay at least 25%. As long as they do that, they can never be evicted for unpaid rent during that period of time. Beginning July 1st in Superior Court, landlords could file a claim for unpaid rent. And then beginning on August 1st in Small Claims Court, landlords can file a claim for unpaid rent. However, as we'll go into a little bit later, if the tenant really has been impacted by COVID-19 and that's the reason they can't pay rent, then they should be eligible. Hopefully, they'll be eligible for rental assistance that will go in. And so that would, of course, be better for the tenant and better for the landlord, since they don't have to go through the court process in order to try to recover that unpaid rent. So the other protection is that what's called just cause eviction protections. This is under an earlier state law, AB 1482. Generally, that law only applies to certain types of properties, generally multifamily apartments, properties that are more than 15 years old, and generally single-family houses owned by individuals are exempt from that law. But right now, at least through next month, at least through June 31st of this year, all rental properties, including shared housing situations, do have the protection of just cause eviction requirements. We'll go into that in a little more detail. And then the final point in summary I want to make is that beginning July 1st, renters are expected to pay the full rent, or else they could be evicted for non-payment of rent. Next slide, please. If a landlord's, going back to August of last year, if a tenant doesn't pay rent, generally, previously, before these protections under state law, if a tenant did not pay rent, the landlord could serve the tenant with a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. So the tenant would have 3 business days to pay the rent or move out in order to avoid the possibility of eviction. But under this state law protection, the landlord now has to give a 15-day notice to pay or quit. And the landlord also has to include a blank declaration of financial distress form. And as long as the tenant signs that declaration of financial distress form and returns it to the landlord within 15 days, then they're protected from eviction for that period of time. Let's see. And okay, I've already mentioned this. Renters must pay full rent by July 1st. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the rent is not forgiven. It is still owed to the landlord, but the repayment is delayed. So again, unpaid rent for any period of time between March of last year and June, the end of June of this year, becomes consumer debt. And as long as the tenant complied with the requirements of providing the declaration of distress form and paying 25% of the rent that was due from September through the end of June, then the tenant is protected from eviction. There's no late fees or interest that can be collected on this, what they call COVID-19 rental debt. That's protected under the state law. And also, if for any reason the tenant is not eligible for the rental assistance program we're going to discuss in a few minutes, and the landlord does go to court, probably small claims court, to recover, the landlord will have to document that they have made some kind of effort to determine if the tenant was eligible for rental assistance and cooperated. So if you're a landlord and your tenant submits the application for rental assistance, there are certain documents that you'll need to submit. Usually it's a rent, I believe it's, well, I'm going to let Allison talk about that in a minute, but there's certain documents, including a W-9 form, the landlord will have to provide. If the landlord does not cooperate and the judge, it's determined by the court, by the judge, that the tenant was eligible for rental assistance and there were funds available, then the court does have the authority to reduce the amount of damages, monetary damages the landlord would otherwise be entitled to. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, all rental properties until June 31st are covered under just cause eviction requirements. But a tenant can still be evicted for certain reasons other than non-payment of rent. There's two types of just cause eviction justifications, and one of those is at fault. So this would be a violation of the lease other than non-payment of rent. Perhaps the rental agreement does not allow smoking in the unit or does not allow pets. If the tenant violates any of those types of provisions, the landlord does have to give at least a 3-day notice to correct the violation. And if the tenant does not correct within that period of time, then the landlord could proceed with an eviction based on failure to correct the violation of the lease. The tenant can also, there are certain types of what's called no fault just cause reasons to terminate a tenancy. And this would be something like the owner decides they want to move into the property, or a close family, have a close family member, son or daughter or parent move in, and that's why they need the tenant to move out. That is an allowable reason under this law for the determination or even eviction to go forward. If it's a notice to terminate in order to substantially remodel the property, there are some extra protections now. It has to be something that would otherwise, that's affecting, it has to be serious enough that it's affecting the livability or habitability of the unit in order for a landlord to be able to validly terminate the tenancy or evict the tenant under that just cause reason. And of course, if the so-called just cause reason for terminating the tenancy is really because the landlord has not received the rent payment, there are protections in the law against doing that. It's like considered a type of retaliation for a landlord, by a landlord against a tenant, because the tenant's exercising their protections under this law. There are some additional penalties for illegal lockouts of a tenant. This would be where the landlord, rather than going through the court process, decides they're just going to change the locks, cut off the utilities, something like that. Normally, the maximum penalties are $100 a day for illegal lockouts. If the tenant has submitted the declaration of distress, the penalties actually can go up to at least $1,000 to $2,500 for such actions by the landlord. Next slide, please. Allison, I'm going to turn it over to Allison at this point. She has quite a bit of experience with helping tenants with rental assistance recently.
Hi, nice to be here tonight. Yes, so as Mark was saying, there are programs to help tenants and landlords who have been impacted by COVID-19 financial distress. That includes anything from loss of income to increased in expenses if the tenant had to obtain childcare because their child was, not in school. So there's a number of different reasons that you can claim and make that declaration of financial impact. And so the programs are for low-income residents. And there are a couple of different programs, and I'll go into more detail about that in a moment. The two programs serve different income brackets. The statewide COVID-19 rent relief program is for folks that are between 30% and above AMI and 80%. I'm sorry, the statewide, yes. And then the local program, the Santa Clara County Homeless Prevention System, is going to address those tenants who are at 30% or below of our annual median income. Both programs are available for tenants or landlords to apply. If one applies, the other will be notified to complete their part of the application. Landlords have to agree to waive 20% of owed rent to get 80% paid. That might change to 100% paid, and because Governor Gavin Newsom has promised that they will do that. And when that happens, they would go back and to make whole those who had already applied. So there's no reason to delay applying if you think you might get 100% down the road. We encourage you to apply sooner, to get into the queue, to get into the line, get your payment, and if there's more money available later, it will come your way. If the landlord doesn't agree to participate when the tenant applies because they don't want to waive the 20%, the tenant will get 25% of the rent owed that they can pay the landlord, and then that protects them from eviction. They can never be evicted for the rest of the unpaid rent. And as Mark pointed out, the courts will take into consideration whether or not the landlord tried to access rental assistance if they do try to take their tenant to court. The landlord will need to provide proof of ownership of the property, proof of rental to that tenant in the form of a lease agreement or other written documentation. They'll have to show how much rent is owed for each month over the past since March of last year. Tenants have to document their income, their household income, how many members are in the household, and then how many of the adults over the age of 18 are earning money and how much. They have to document that they live at the address and proof of identity. There will be no information required to show citizenship or immigration status. And tenants can also apply for assistance with unpaid utilities. There's also a possibility to apply for April, May, and June. It was for the year, April through March originally, but you can also apply for some assistance for April, May, and June. I believe that's 25%, as well as utilities for those months as well. Next slide, please. So we said that these programs are dependent on the income level of the tenants. For the homeless prevention system, which is our local program here in Santa Clara County, if your household size is, depending on your household size on the left-hand side of this slide, if your income is less than $34,800 for a one-person household, then you would qualify for the local program. If it's between $34,800 and $82,450, you would apply to the state program. And so it goes by the number of adults in the household and how much income they have. But the number of people in the household includes children. Next slide, please. So the good thing is that in Santa Clara County, you don't have to figure out how to apply to each program separately. If you go to the www.sccrenthelp.org website, you can find the link to the appropriate program for you. If you know that you or your tenant, if your tenant is at or below 30% of AMI, or if you're a tenant who is at or below 30% AMI, you can call the Homeless Prevention System program phone number there on the screen, and they can assist you. If you know that the tenant is at 80% of AMI or less, down to 30%, they can connect directly to the state program by calling that number or going to housingiskey.com. If you need assistance applying to the state program, you can find useful resources on our website, including a step-by-step video, one for tenants, one for landlords, on how to apply. Our website with that information is housing.org/COVID-19. And you can also find blank copies of the Declaration of Financial Distress on that page. And we have translated into Spanish if you need a copy in Spanish. Next slide, please.
Okay, so thank you, Allison. So I'll pick it up from here. So under the Santa Clara County eviction moratorium ordinance, there were actually two parts to it. There was a protection for residential tenants, and when the state law came in last year in August, that basically preempted the residential eviction moratorium in the county ordinance. But the state law did not affect the commercial eviction moratorium protections in the county ordinance. And so that's continued. It was extended previously to March of this year. And then when the state law was extended to the end of June, the county did the same and extended the commercial, should really call it a commercial eviction moratorium. This is not residential, it's commercial. So these are, this is a situation where someone's renting a commercial property, maybe running a hair salon or some other business like that. And so they are also protected against being evicted for non-payment of rent if they're unable to pay rent due to COVID-19 financial distress. The ordinance also allows these commercial tenants to 6 months after the end of the ordinance. So basically at the end of this year, December, they should have repaid at least 50% of the unpaid rent. And then they will have until June of next year to pay 100% of unpaid commercial rents. Just like with the residential moratorium, commercial tenants also have to provide documentation of the COVID-related distress that they're experiencing. Next slide, please. So small landlords, and this is defined as a person who owns 4 or less rental properties, and each rental property cannot have more than 4 units, so basically up to 4 fourplexes. If landlords small landlords, as so defined, who have experienced COVID-19 related distress, and that means that at least one of their tenants has not been able to pay rent due to COVID-19 impact, then they can get a forbearance on their mortgage. So in order to avoid foreclosure for non-payment of that mortgage. So it's a very simple process. The owner, the landlord, would simply contact their mortgage servicer to request the forbearance and go through that process. If they're denied, they do have, if there's errors, they do have 21 days to correct any errors. If they're denied, they do have the ability to contest the denial. Next slide, please. So here's just some resources. The first one takes you to the state website, and that has information not only about the tenant protections that we described earlier, but also the statewide rental assistance programs. And then here's the link to the county eviction moratorium, which at this point really only applies to commercial tenants that I described. So Project Sentinel provides basically landlord-tenant counseling for tenants and landlords in Milpitas. We are neutral. we're not advocates for tenants or landlords, where our goal really is to try to educate tenants and landlords, both tenants and landlords, to understand what their respective rights and responsibilities are. And so our services are free and they're confidential. If you call us about a situation, you can be sure that if your tenant happens to call us the next day, if you're a landlord who calls us and your tenant happens to call us the next day, you can be assured that we're not going to share any information that you told us, the previous day with your tenant, of course. And so there's our contact information. You're welcome to call us at the number listed. You're also welcome to email us at that email address. And we can, often what I can do is send information. We have a lot of information we can send you by email that help you understand your situation and figure it out, whether it's by email or by phone. And next slide, please. And these are general contacts for all of us, I guess. Yeah. And are we ready for questions?
Right. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Allison. That was great. Yeah, so as Mark just mentioned, and as you can see on the screen, we have the general contact info for basically all the presenters here. So we have Silicon Valley Independent Living Center up top, Project Sentinel in the middle, and then our Building Safety and Housing Department, specifically for the Housing Department email and contact number there at the bottom. We did have a question from Bob in the attendees list, and I'll answer sort of one part of this, and then Mark, maybe I can just turn it to you for the second part. But his question is simple: is there a rent control ordinance in Milpitas? And the simple answer is no, there is no rent control ordinance in Milpitas. But if you could just speak a little bit, Mark, about rent control in general, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So the city of Milpitas does not have a rent control ordinance or any law that limits the amount of rent that a landlord can charge. However, under state law, I mentioned this earlier, AB 1482, otherwise known as the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. There's actually two parts to it. I discussed a little bit about the just cause eviction requirements that temporarily apply to all rental properties. But the other part of that law, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, is a rent cap that applies to a lot of properties, but not all properties. Currently in Santa Clara County, that rent cap is 6% per year. So in other words, no rent increase greater than 6% during the previous 12 months period. Generally, as I mentioned, I think earlier, that law, Tenant Protection Act, applies to older multifamily properties. So these are properties that were built and first occupied more than 15 years ago. So newer apartment complexes that just went up 5, 10, 12, 14 years ago are not covered by that law. And so under state law, there would be no rent increase limit on those units. Single family properties, houses, condominiums, generally, no matter how old they are, how recently they were constructed or occupied, are exempt from this law, as long as they're owned by an individual rather than having some type of form of corporate ownership. I guess that's kind of a long answer to your short question. It really depends on the property whether there's rent control on any given property in Milpitas. It wouldn't be city rent control, but it might be rent control under this state law. The one other thing I will mention about Milpitas, though, in terms of rent increases, is Milpitas, I'm sorry, because I get confused, I cover both cities. Milpitas does have a rent review ordinance. And so, and the purpose of the rent review ordinance is to give tenants and landlords a forum, a process to try to resolve disputes over rent increases. So in Milpitas, when a landlord gives a rent increase, they have to also include a notice that tells the tenant that they have certain rights under this rent review ordinance to open a case and go through this dispute resolution process. It's like a form of mediation. And so if a tenant gets a rent increase, they get the notice, they decide they want to open a case, they give us a call, we'll contact the landlord. The first step is what we call a consultation, see if there's any room for negotiation on the amount or the terms of the rent increase or some other issue sometimes, and try to resolve it that way. If that doesn't result in resolving the tenant's concerns, then the tenant does have the option of going to a second step of mediation, a face-to-face meeting with the landlord, with a mediator there to facilitate the discussion, try to help the parties reach a better understanding and perhaps a resolution. And then there's even a third step. If the tenant wishes, they can take it before a rent review board that would issue a recommendation on whether or not that rent increase is appropriate, but ultimately the landlord does not have to follow the recommendation of the rent review board. It's sort of a non-binding process for the landlord. I hope that answers your question.
I don't know if you mentioned it. I didn't hear you mention that currently that cap on those older properties is 6% in Santa Clara County.
Right. Yeah, I think I did mention that. 6% right now. It will vary from year to year. The formula is 5% plus whatever the cost of living increase was, the increase in the CPI for the previous 12 months, based on, I think, April to April, although the actual figures are not going to come out until August 1st.
Mark, you mentioned a lot of dates in your presentation, and I think as the eviction moratorium continued to get extended out, I think those dates changed a little bit. What's the easiest way for someone to get clarity on their situation? Would it just be to simply reach out to Project Sentinel and speak to you one-on-one? Would that be the easiest way to do that?
Sure. That's always the easiest way. A simple phone call, leave a message, or email. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then what other services can folks come to Project Sentinel for beyond just, I know we're talking about, rental assistance,
right,
but Project Sentinel does do other things. Could you just kind of briefly touch on those things?
Yes. So we have we provide also fair housing services. So if a tenant is concerned, if a tenant feels that they've been discriminated against in some way, or on a protected category, whether it's their race or religion, perhaps they feel like they're being treated differently or not rented to because they have children, they can call us and talk to one of our fair housing specialists about whether they're protected against both state and federal laws that prohibit discrimination in housing. Also, disabled tenants who may want what we call a reasonable accommodation. Perhaps the unit they're renting does not allow pets, but they have a service animal, and the landlord may not understand that a service animal is not considered a pet. And so often what we end up doing is simply contacting the landlord and educating them so they understand what their obligations are in regard to disabled tenants. So that's a big part of what they do, dealing with reasonable accommodation requests for disabled tenants. In addition to our fair housing services, we also have a HUD certified housing counseling department that helps with loan modifications. If a tenant if a homeowner, small homeowner, is having a problem with paying their mortgage, in some cases those loans can be restructured. Also, they do first-time homebuyer counseling and also for homeowners that may be considering a reverse mortgage, they also do that type of counseling.
Great, thank you. So we do have a question from Bob. I'm going to allow him to speak, and Bob, when you're ready, you can unmute and ask your question directly.
Yeah, so hi. This is let's go back to the Milpitas situation. The landlord increased the rent by 6% last December, and the client is telling me she just got another notice for another 6% in June. So even although the landlord has not sent the eviction notice, the client is just so concerned, right? And, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So that's why she was paranoid and calling us. We're a Santa Clara County COVID-19 outreach program.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow she found us, and so that's why we're trying to understand. And of course, she lives in Milpitas. I asked her what the name is of that apartment is. She says she told me, but I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's why I was trying to figure out: is there a rent control?
Right. Is it, Bob? Is it possible that it's a below market rate complex?
That I do not know. She told me like that back in December, her rent was like 1890, then increased to 1990. Then just this month, the landlord is
Right.
increasing.
I've gotten a couple of calls. If it's the complex I'm thinking of, did you say if it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath unit?
Mark?
I don't remember. So
Mark,
Yeah.
and so yeah, we can talk about that specific case, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, I think maybe the question is, are landlords allowed to raise rents more than once in a given year?
Under the state law, they can raise it twice. If they're
Oh.
covered by the Tenant Protection Act, they can raise it up to twice.
Okay.
But in Milpitas, under the rent review ordinance, they're only allowed to raise it once per year if it's covered by the rent review ordinance. Not all properties are. The rent review ordinance exempts newer properties built less than 15 years ago. And Bob, if this is a complex I'm thinking of, it's exempt from the rent review ordinance because it was built less than 15 years ago, and it's exempt from the state law because it's a below market rate complex, which is one of the categories of properties that are exempt from the rent cap under state law.
But also, Mark, if I may, and just to clarify, they can raise the rent more than once per year as long as it doesn't exceed the maximum allowable increase for the year, correct?
That's true. Under the state law.
Okay. And the
If
state
raise
law
less
is
than
capped.
twice now, if the rent cap is 6% and they raise it 6% twice, then that would be a violation of the rent cap, unless the property is exempt. And I think this property, if it's the same one I'm thinking of, I think this property is exempt from the law.
And generally
The best
speaking,
thing, Bob, the best thing to do is have the tenant give me a call.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm staying here, just to know who is doing this, who's handling it. No,
Yeah.
I do have another question. Is regarding this California this rent assistance program, right? So because we do have clients, and actually several clients, they applied back in March, this state program. At that time, we didn't know about this local Santa Clara County program. So everybody, we just direct them to the state program, and so they applied, and so far we have about 45 people in our team. So I asked my coworkers, has anybody got any success that the state has granted this either 25% or 80%, and I haven't heard anybody or from the clients telling us, yes, they got 25% or 80%. my clients called me directly, and two of them. One said, I applied back in March. I haven't heard anything. And another person, similar case, and she hasn't heard anything. So I just like to, and when they call the state program, one person even has a case number, and he thought I can help them to trace what the status is of his application. I said, I have no way to trace, right, to help you trace, even you give me the case number. So
Yeah.
I'd like to know how could a client with a case number, they can trace their application. That is our main concern. It seems it goes to a black hole, and we don't know. So that's the other concern I have.
Yes. So unfortunately, it does seem to be kind of slow rolling out. The local program only rolled out basically last week, but the state has agreed to process all those applications that were received before May 20th, regardless of the income level of the applicants. So that's the good news. Yes, if they have a case number, they can trace, they can make an inquiry about the status of their case by calling the, I was just going to look it up quickly on my computer, and I realized that because I'm on Zoom, that's taking up my browser. I don't think I can look it up, but if you call us, we can provide you with the state phone number that will allow applicants to check on the status of their case. And I recommend they do it because a couple people I know who have called have discovered that the landlord and tenant pieces of the application didn't get matched up. And so that has to happen for things to progress. But if they're in that lower income category and are worried about not having received anything as of yet, if they applied to the state program, their application will be processed by the state. So yeah, contact us for that information about how to check the status.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those questions. I don't see anything else here listed. Oh, looks like he might have had one more question. Let me just go back to him real quick. Didn't want to do that either. All right. Go ahead and 1 second, Bob. I'm going to get you back up here and get you back on. There we go. You can go ahead and unmute.
Allison, what is your phone number so client can call? Hello?
Allison, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. I was on mute. I'm looking at our frequently asked questions. I'm going to get you that phone number for the state program.
You can put it in the chat, Allison. That would be really helpful.
I will do that.
Okay. And Bob, you can go ahead and look for that in the chat.
I do have that a state program phone number is 833 something. If the client actually called and they said the state says we don't really cannot tell you too much at this time. So so basically, there's no answer.
Not a problem, Bob. I would just recommend that if any of the clients are from Milpitas, that you refer them directly to Silicon Valley Independent Living Center for Milpitas Rent Relief Program. We have that first part of the presentation really touched on, just a dedicated rental assistance program for Milpitas residents. So if any of the clients that you're referring to live in Milpitas, I would highly recommend going there first before engaging, the county or the state, as those funds aren't dedicated to Milpitas residents. For any other clients, obviously, that's fine. You can go and navigate the state funding. But if they live in Milpitas, I would highly recommend you reach out to Silicon Valley Independent Living Center first.
Yeah,
I would only caution that if they have applied to the state program and get the rent relief from the state program, they'll have to repay whatever portion they get in the interim from another program. So it might complicate things if they're just about to get rent relief from the state program. So the call center or case manager can check the status of a case or reopen the application for revisions. And the call center can be reached. It's an 833 number, 430-2122.
yes.
Or
yes.
you can email support@ca-rentrelief.com.
Okay, and we have a couple minutes left here, so thank you, Bob, for your questions. Really appreciate it. Feel
Thank
free
you.
to reach out to us. Our contact information is right here on the screen. If you have any further questions, we're certainly happy to assist. And then I believe we have just one last pitch. If the representative from SV at Home is on, please raise your hand so I can bring you in. Otherwise, I will endeavor to promote SV at Home. And I will endeavor to promote SV at Home. So this presentation, and thank you to Project Sentinel and Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, Allison, Mark, Angelica. We really appreciate your time and all the work that you do in our community. And a special thank you to Sarah Court, who is our housing planner, and Sharon Goey, our Director of Building Safety and Housing, for all the work they do on the various housing programs beyond just rental assistance. Always appreciate the teamwork, the effort, and time and energy that it takes to work these programs. And we also are grateful for our partners here, SV at Home, for putting on Affordable Housing Month and allowing us to do an event out to the community. If you want to check out more of the work that SV at Home does, you can certainly find them on Instagram, LinkedIn, and social. It's all listed here. But if you want to listen or watch any of their other events from this month, that bit.ly/SV Housing Month 2021 link will take you to all of their events across all the cities that are hosting events. And it's really good information. So we encourage everybody to check it out. And we've also put some of that information, or we can put some of that information in the chat as well. But with that, I will stop sharing, and I will just say thank you again to everybody for attending, and stay safe. And thank you for joining us this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you, Robert. Thanks,
Thank you
Allison.
for having us. Take care.